we need to do an unit called as Araby, which is by James Joyce. Now, in order to start teaching this unit, I need to first tell you in very basic terms what is meant by post-colonialism in literature. Now, when we look at the title over here, post-colonialism, you will find that the words seem to be joined together. The word post and colonialism seem to be joined together when we write post-colonialism. Obviously, in all your minds, you will think of this fact that why should we write post-colonialism like that? In the screen in front of you, you can find so many writers marked over there. Now we have writers like Amitav Ghosh, Salman Rushdie, we have got Nayantara Saigal, we have got so many writers over here, Adib Khan. Now all these people are basically here on this page because they have contributed to post-colonial literature. Now, let us move to the term, as I said, that the term post-colonialism cannot be written with a hyphen. Now, why so? Well, generally, if I say post-graduation, what does it mean? It means that at the end of graduation or after your graduation, whatever course you take up, that is referred to as post-graduation course. Now, if I'm talking about post-colonialism, then it would mean that I mean to say all those things that happened after the end of colonialism. However, it is there that the problem arises. You will realize that there were a number of things during the colonial period, like for example, our education system. There were many social ways of behavior, cultural traits which were followed during that era. However, these traits changed with the advent of the imperialist power, which is Great Britain or England in this instance. Now, when these changes took place, the British had not already left our country. The changes started the moment colonialism began in our country. And so, we have the beginning of the changes taking place just after the arrival of the British. So then, what is post-colonialism? Why am I not using a hyphen? I am not using a hyphen because I do not want to refer to the period after the end of colonialism when the British imperialist power left the country. I would rather refer to the period of time after the beginning of colonialism. And to indicate this difference, I have not put a hyphen in the term post-colonialism. So whenever in future we use the term post-colonialism, we are more likely to use it without the hyphen. Basically, post-colonialism signifies all the possible changes, whether it be political, economic, social, or cultural, which took place because colonialism impacted us. Because colonial powers came to our country, they changed things for us. Now, how do we understand this post-colonial literature? Because it talks about what is not liked about the colonial, how it is in opposition to the colonial. So post-colonial literature is basically displays all the characteristics which shows how certain things about the colonial is not desirable. However, you must remember that colonialism did not just impact the colonies, although we are more concerned with us, the way it has hit us. Remember that it's a two-way process. Colonialism also impacted the colonizers as well. And this is something that you must bear in mind. However, when we talk about post-colonialism, we generally tend to talk about the problems that we have faced in the wake of colonialism. Now, when I'm consistently talking to you about colonialism, my point is, what really do we understand by this term colonialism? Colonialism is talking about military oppression, economic oppression, cultural oppression. It talks about how one country establishes its dominion over another. There are several kinds of colonialism. Invasion colonization is something that you're familiar with. For instance, the British came to India, they invaded us, and they made us, or they made India their own colony. So this was invasion colonization. However, there are places where you find not only did they go over there, but they tried to settle down over there. So the issue over here is possession of land. So they wanted to know who or how could they usurp the land of the people who were originally settled there. Now, settlement colonization is not merely about invasion and having their monopoly or power over there. It is about land, how they can settle down in land which they have no claim over, but they wanted to establish a claim over the land. Internal colonization is what happens within the contours of the country. For instance, today we have no colonization, but the British powers have long ago left us. However, you find that within our country also there are people who are trying to dominate. The people who are more powerful are trying to put across or bring across their power, and they are trying to tell us that you are inferior. So that is internal colonialism taking place. Neo-colonialism is also taking place in certain countries. Here, the imperialist power has left the country and has gone to some other place. But they have gone back. But the people are not ready. They are not able to take over the reins of power in their own country. They do not know what to do next. They are not prepared. And as a result, from a distance, the same imperialist power is trying to use their own policies, is asserting themselves, and is trying to rule from a distance. This is neo-colonialism. Look at this picture. You will find that this is a depiction of colonialism. It is all about power. As you can see, these are biscuit boxes on which the imperialist power are sitting. And they are not giving it to the natives. And the natives have to crawl and beg for these. This is another picture which depicts colonialism, where you can find the natives trying to please the colonizers, but the colonizers are using them in different ways. So, we have come to our colonialist ideology. What do you really mean by the colonizers? Who is a colonizer and who is a colonized? Well, simply, colonizer is somebody who has come from some other country and comes and occupies your country. They consider themselves as very important, as the center of the world. And so what about the people who were originally staying here? Those colonies, the people who were staying in these colonies, they are driven to the margins. In other words, they are marginalized. For the colonizer, who is important? The self. So what they say, what the self feels is important, is important. So what is important to me is what is of concern. But everybody else, including the colonized, because of the differences in the ways of living, we consider them as other. Not only that, because I, as a self, am in the center. Therefore, the other is considered as inferior. I am superior. Whatever I do is the best. And the other is all considered as inferior. Basically, the concern here is always about us, benefits to us. How are we going to be benefited? And everybody else is given the othering treatment. They, the third person usage, where you are pushed to the margins. You are not considered as very important. Why? Because they consider themselves as civilized. And all the colonized people are considered as savages, to say the least. Because what they do is right. And what is not taken to be the conventional way of living in the West is all considered to be below average. And so they are all considered as savages. Now, there were a number of texts which were written during that era. Now, we are concerned with how that particular literary text should be analyzed. Should we consider it as a colonialist text, or should we consider it as anti-colonialist text? Because if the text is trying to put across an idea, to reinforce an idea about colonialism, it's very much a colonialist text. What is left for us to do? We need to resist this colonialist ideology, because for us it's an oppressive one. We are not satisfied with this sort of an ideology. Now then, what really is post-colonial literature? Post-colonial literature is the sum total of Commonwealth literature and colonial discourse analysis. Well, let us see then, if it is the sum total of these two things, what is Commonwealth literature? Well, when the British went away, they had managed to teach English to many of the colonies. So people from the colonies started producing works in English. Now these works were different from the English works which were already in existence. The difference existed because the ideology itself was different. The thinking was different, the nationality, the upbringing, everything changes us from within. And we find that Commonwealth literature was created as a sort of a bank wherein they wanted to include all those aspects of literature, which were produced in places other than the metropolitan Britain. But people had lots of objections to this. For one of the major thing was that if we are producing works in English literature, why should our work be considered as inferior to that of the British? So, if my work or our work is going to be included in Commonwealth literature, why should the British work not be a part of Commonwealth literature? Why the distinction? Secondly, we all know that America was a part of post-colonial literature because America was also colonized. But very astonishingly, we find that in the Commonwealth literature, there is no place for American literature. And that is also raises a question mark. We also found that literature of colonies was considered as inferior. And this is where people like Salman Rushdie, they raised their voice in protest. They did not feel that this is correct. The land of origin of literature was considered important under Commonwealth literature. But the claim was, look at the quality of work that was produced. If the quality of work is as good, there is no reason why it should not receive a place of acclaim. Another problem with Commonwealth literature was that when we stay in a nation, we come across other people. And when we come across people of other nationalities, especially when we cross boundaries, we tend to influence each other. And when we influence each other, that influence should have been a part. It becomes a part of us. And therefore, it is reflected in literature. But Commonwealth literature does not consider this as important. They do not consider it. Moreover, very importantly, it was perceived by people, especially Salman Rushdie, who said that this is nothing but nostalgic glorification of the legacies of colonialism. What the British is trying to do is, it is trying to relive those experiences and feel happy about the days that they have spent as the colonizers. And therefore, they do not want to include our work with the mainstream. They have segregated or clubbed everybody together as a part of Commonwealth literature. Whereas actually, there is Sri Lankan literature, there is Indian literature, there is literature being produced from almost all the colonies. And these are not being taken into consideration. They're being clubbed together as if they're all the same. This is where the problem rises. So we needed post-colonial literature. We need to understand that the literature is still the same. The same literature was put into our earlier Commonwealth literature as well. But now, under post-colonial literature, what we find is that the same literature is put inside that also, but the critical approach has changed totally. What do we mean by critical approach has changed? Well, now we are not willing to accept everything as it has been doled out to us. If we look at the literature, then you will find there are places where we dare to say that we have been given a raw deal. We straight away mention things like the Indians are not lazy, as the stereotype has been created. But maybe we have not been given as much opportunity. So also the Africans, they asserted themselves and they said that no, this is not what we are not lazy, we are not cowards, but only we are more human. So the critical approach, the ways of looking at the literature changed. Moreover, we find that a lot of literature has been emanating from the other corners of India. These works were in different languages. Now, if they are not translated, it does not mean that they are not post-colonial literature. Earlier, Commonwealth literature refused to accept them. But post-colonial literature now accepts such works as well. Only thing is that the focus should be on anti-colonialism, where the intention is that we want to subvert, we need to undo all the violence or atrocities that has been carried out against the colonies. Can you see here what is happening? Basically, what are we trying to do in post-colonial literature? We are trying to go back in time and look back at what we had in our past. Our past was glorious as well. And so we are not going to allow the changes which took place during colonial literature to influence us. We are going to find the positives in our own past. Let us look at what we understand by colonial discourse analysis. I told you that post-colonialism is the sum total of not only the literatures which were existing before, but also colonial discourse analysis. So here we talk about double consciousness. What do we mean by double consciousness? Well, I live in India. I'm very, very aware as to how the Indian people think. But suppose I were to go and live in some other country, I would still know how the Indian thinks, but I would also perhaps realize, if I'm living in Canada, what the Canadian is thinking. I'm aware of their ways of living. So there is a double consciousness. Eurocentrism means where the focus of interest is always Europe. And Europe is most important. Everything else is considered as less important. And this is what we propose to challenge. Orientalism. This is a concept that was put forth by Edward Said. Now Said, he is the first one who pointed out that the Orient was actually constructed. It is not a reality. The Orient has been constructed with the single purpose of trying to show the East as inferior to the West. It is an attempt at othering the East. And so Orientalism talks about the ways in which the colonizers have distinguished between the East and the West. Next term is mimicry. Well, we always tend to mimic or copy. And we find that there is a tendency to copy the styles. Now, the British wrote in a particular style. What the Indians used to do, for example, we had oral narratives. Similarly, in Africa, they had oral narratives. So, these were ways in which we narrated our story. Our ways of narration was very much different from those of the British. But with the British having come forward, we realized that They have a different way of narrating. So we have imbibed from them as well. We mimicked them. But we also inserted within it ways in which we used to narrate. So it is an amalgam now of both the styles of narration. Hybridity is talking about a similar thing, where we talk about how two things are mixed together. If I talk in terms of clothes, if I live here in India, I used to wear maybe only saris or maybe only dresses. But with the influence of the British or maybe even the world today, we may also wear jeans. It is very common to see us wearing Western clothes. Now this is what we mean by hybridity. It's a sort of mixing up. Then we come to the final term here, which is of very great significance, and that is hegemony. What do you understand by hegemony? Hegemony is the attempt of trying to assert your supremacy over others. But how? How do we do that? I convince the other person that what I am telling is actually right. And when I am saying something, it is actually for their own good. And keeping this in mind, I convince them that they should do things my way. For instance, if I want my maid to be very regular in work, I will try to convince her that punctuality is a very important trait, and it is what makes the difference. When we are punctual and regular, then we tend to do wonders in the world. We have managed to make a place in this world only because we do not have bad habits like abstaining from work. And when they are convinced, they feel guilty if they take a leave even for a single day. And this is precisely what we wanted to do. This is what we mean by hegemony. Without actually telling them, I have them under my control. And they believe that it is for their own good. Now here we have certain talks about Orientalism. I told you Edward Said was the one who put forth the theory of Orientalism. Now when he spoke about the exotic and the radicalized. Okay? Let us look at these pictures. These are Oriental images. See the first picture. If you look carefully, what do you find? You find a child there, and what is there around the neck of that child? You see it's a big serpent. Can you see that? Now this serpent around the neck of the child, and the child is in the nude. Now this entire picture was not a photograph, but it is put across as if it is a photograph. It is created by the imagination of the painter or the artist. But when it is portrayed as if it is a real photograph which has been clicked somewhere in the East. And therefore, along with it is established the way of thinking that in the East, people are all snake charmers. We move around with snakes, and also that people are in the nude. So these are ways. Similarly, in the other one, you can see Thief of Baghdad, where you can see a picture has been created of magic carpet, which is moving across. Now, giving you the impression that the East is so very different, so exotic, so very, very much different from the West. And therefore, it cannot be taken at its as similar to the West. Now, let us go to the strategies which is used by post-colonial writers. I told you that these post-colonial writers no longer want to accept what the British has dumped on us. But to fight them back, it is very important that we use their language. And so, we use their language, English. However, there are differences in the English that we speak, in the pronunciations that the ways in which we pronounce the English words. Even sometimes you find that we tend to mean something a little different from what the original language meant. So we bent the language, we appropriated it and used it as per our convenience. Then, another strategy what the post-colonial writers did was, they started writing meta-narratives. Now, meta-narratives, or they started challenging the colonial discourse with counter-discourse. Now, what do I mean by this? Meta-narratives means small stories, I say, which vindicates a particular point. For example, suppose somebody says that in your past you have had rulers who gave in very easily. Or you say that we had XYZ so and so ruler who was cheated by his own cousin. And because he was cheated, he lost the kingdom. Now, when we try to write a meta-narrative, we try to put across the amount of pressures that was perceived by the so-called cousin who cheated the ruler. And we tell very clearly that this is the actual story. This is what happened. This person was not actually willing to go and reveal the truth. But if he had not, there were consequences that he would need to face. For example, he would perhaps have to maybe lose a family member, or he had somebody at stake, his own life or maybe his property, something was at stake if he did not give in to the demands of the British. So with the help of a meta-narrative, we are able to justify the claim or we are going to fight against the claim which has been made by the colonialist power. We need to actually deal with the legacy of colonialism. Colonialism, just because it has happened, does not mean that we have to keep on living with things as they are. We need to challenge them, counter-discourse, oppose them. If they tell you a story, you tell them something else which challenges their version. If they say this is the truth, they say that, oh, look, this is where the newspaper has reported that this is the event which took place in such and such a place. Then you bring across a person who was living during that time, and the person will then recall through his memory that, oh, during this time, this and this and this also happened. And this has no place in the newspaper coverage. So these are ways in which we can create a counter-discourse. We can challenge the colonial discourse. In other words, we need to bring back our own history. We need to rewrite the history. We don't want history to look as though we were in the wrong all along. They have tried to justify their role here by saying that they were here to actually they have colonized the people because the people here were perceived to be maybe what we call as junglis, or people who do not have any sense of right or wrong. We have no religion. We had nothing which could be constructed as useful. Naturally, we don't want to accept this version of history because this is far from the truth. So we rewrite history. We retrieve history and claim, make our rightful claim as to how things ought to be. Decolonizing the mind. Basically, when we're talking about colonization, the important thing to undo colonization is to decolonize. Fine, the colonial powers left the country, they went away to another country, so the country is decolonized. But it's not as simple as that. You find that the mind has been colonialized. And this is the politics of language. Language has been used in such a way that you have been made to feel inferior. At every point of time you think, I am inferior to the West. And so, if you find a white man somewhere around, you feel, he is more superior to me. Maybe I might be highly qualified and that other person is just a cobbler in his own country. However, we still tend to think that this person is superior only because he is white and I am not. So this decolonization of the mind is necessary. I have to stop thinking in these terms. Color of the skin is not important, and this needs to be understood by us first. And even when it is understood, we need to overcome this desire to be white. So, there is a need to valorize our cultural identity. We are happy being Indian. And there is something about the Indian identity which is equally important. We need to challenge the stereotypes. We cannot accept whatever versions they have created. Like, for example, India is a land of snake charmers. We cannot accept these stereotypes created by them blindfolded. We need to challenge them. Herein comes in the importance of the term nationalism. We have to understand that we as a nation and our nationhood is as important as the British. And therefore, we have to challenge the versions which have been just dropped in on us. Let us look at an example of post-colonialism. Let us look at the movie LAGAAN. All of you might have seen this movie. Now, in LAGAAN, what do you see? You have the colonizers, who are the superpowers. They are the one who come and tell Amir Khan and his team to play a game of cricket. They are the ones who are asking for LAGAAN. And when Amir Khan says that we are not able to pay it, they, like a game, they just want to make them feel inferior. And so they challenge them to a game of cricket. Captain Russell, he is the one who is the decision maker. Okay? And nobody else has any option. Not that we Indians were, great cricket players. But did we have a choice? They had none. This is where the margins, they were at the margins. We Indians were at the margin. And who was at the center? It was the colonizer, Captain Russell, who represented the colonizer. He is at the center. And then what do we find? We find the transition taking place. India, the Indians used to play games like Gilli Danda. And suddenly we find that they move from Gilli Danda to cricket. And in the process, what do? They make use of various things. For example, the bat, which is such an important part of the game, is created out of a piece of wood. Similarly, other things like a ball. Ball is also created with round objects. Then you find that even the game itself is not known by them. So they learn the game. How do they learn the game? You find that the sister, who is supposed to be a nice character over here, Elizabeth, she is the one who comes and offers to teach them the game of cricket. And in return, what do you think? It is a one-way process. She also learns the local language. You find her wearing sari in one of the scenes, in the Indian attire. And so there is hybridity taking place. So we see an example of hybridity here. Similarly, amongst the colonialism, we reject colonialism because we do not want colonialism here. But over here, generally, the black skin is looked down upon. That is colonialism, looking down upon the black skin. Here we find reverse colonialism in progress, because we find that white femininity is rejected. And in spite of Elizabeth being such a nice character here, she is not preferred. It is the Indian girl who is preferred over her as Amir Khan's choice. Also, there is religion being used as an alternate framework over here. The attempt over here is to understand that we need to create a national identity. We are proud of the fact that, we are religious. We do not find anything wrong in that. So that is a part of our nationality. You look at the team that is created. You have Bhuvan, who is an Hindu. And then you have this Ismail, who is a Muslim. You have Deva, who is a Sikh. And these were actually the major religion powers that we used to find in India in those times. And we find that the team consists of all of these elements. Not only that, we have an element of the untouchable also. We have Kachra, who is considered as who is a Dalit actually. And we find that it is finally his unique bowling technique which helps them to win. But victory is, of course, a joint enterprise. There are many instances of submission that we find over here. We find that Bhuvan has to accept the condition of the match. The villagers have to learn how to play the game. All these things are forms of suppression. Now there are many binary oppositional points of resistance. What appears to be a unified act of resistance, it tends to destabilize. It disorients the colonial rulers. Now see over here, just by winning that game of cricket, so you win in their own game. And in the process, what do you happen? They lose control. You bowl in another way altogether. You have managed, just as we have taken control over their language, we have managed to take control over their game. And in the process, we managed to confuse them. And therefore, they lose control over the situation. And it is we who win the game. So, these are all instances of suppression that we had. Now, the whole idea of LAGAAN is behind the fact that during the British rule, they were actually asked to pay certain amounts to the British as some sort of as a sort of payment, because they wanted to make money. It was as simple as that. It is not as if the Indian was making a lot of money. The Indians were suffering themselves. Sometimes they did not have a very good production in their farms, but still they had no other option but to accept to pay the money. And from where would the money come? There was no money to pay. It is this idea from where the film gets its title. It is obviously set before the British divide and rule policy, and that's how we find the Hindu, Muslim, Sikh all moved together. And you can also see some of the very good aspects of the Victorian era also. Now, even when we have sad moments, we cannot afford to forget good moments, because that is how humanity manages to to remain. Otherwise, we would become pessimistic. Thank you.